Hello, hello. What is up, people? So today we are talking about Google Cloud Security, and I've got Francesco with me, who is the chair of Cloud Security Alliance for UK. And we spoke about what do you need to think about from securing a Google Cloud environment, how Google Cloud Security compares to AWS, Azure. We had a lot of interaction from the LinkedIn Live that we run. So the LinkedIn Live, for those who don't know and are not subscribed, we go live on Twitch and LinkedIn every Sunday, 8 a.m. Melbourne time, Melbourne, Australia time, or 6 p.m. US East Coast time. So you can find a time that works for you. Otherwise, the episode gets available over here, which is what this episode is. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. Subscribe to the channel so you get input on the next one. I hope to see you live on the next live video. For the moment, let's enjoy Francesco talk about Google Cloud Security. I guess the first question that I would like to ask is, obviously, you have been doing some work in the Google Cloud space as well. Mm-hmm. So I was going to ask, in terms of Google Cloud Security, for people who don't know, where does one start with security in Google Cloud? Say, some people obviously have background in AWS already. Like I have background in AWS. Oh, is there someone live from Melbourne AU? Sorry, got distracted. By the way, for people who are watching this live, feel free to leave a comment on where you're joining in from. Got from someone from Melbourne, a few people from the US as well. So it's really good to have you guys. If you guys have questions, feel free to drop them in.
I don't think I can. Can I see the live comment?
I
can. Actually can. Yeah, no, I can stop there.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect. You just zoomed out, man. There you go. You're back in focus. You're like, you have some high-tech stuff going on over there. I don't know what you have going on there, but 11 o'clock in the night, you have some really high-tech stuff going on over there. So my first question. Oh, yeah. Risky is the high-tech. That is right. My first question for you is, I guess, what is cloud security in Google for you, like Google Cloud?
So let's take a little bit of a history. So AWS, of course, was the first one that came about. And they effectively, what they did is they took the data center and whatever they were doing, and they said, how we can save the spare memory and the spare time and how we can sell it to everybody. So they're really engineering focused. They're really, that's the bare bone of computing. You can do whatever you want. They open up every API possible to whatever they want. And then came along Azure. I think 2006 was when the first AWS service were born, and 2010 is when Azure showed up. Azure is a little bit different because they started with Office 365, so the more SaaS solution, the more cloud solution for Office, email, and so on. Because historically they were closer to the enterprise, and then after that came GCP. So GCP started with or Google Cloud service started with very, very specific service. So compute was actually one of the least that was added. So they started offering not compute as such, but what they were really powerful on. So data analytics, machine learning, or any kind of algorithm, but very, very tailor-made, and any kind of, if you want, function that they were already using and reselling it to third party. So BigQuery, Big Data, the whole analytic platform were the first one that actually came about. And then because everybody was asking compute once you're in GCP, then you know what? We offer also compute. And fundamentally, compute was one of the last that came about. The VPC, if you want, the virtual machine isolation in the cloud was not the very least to be added, but it wasn't something very, very straightforward. So back to your question, where do you start in GCP? As AWS, plan your network, segment your network, divide the network for blast radius. So saying, this is a service, this is a tree stack tier. I just dedicate a number of network and I close this thing into a VPC that is effectively the virtual network. Start applying access control rule about the various layer, routing, and that's really the basic that you can do.
Right. And to your point about Google Cloud started off the other way because AWS already had the competition kind of taken out by compute power.
Right.
And data was kind of like theirs. Well, yeah, they haven't sucked in data for a long time.
Other than data, analytics was really powerful. So they repurpose a lot of analytics things. So they offer, for example, very simple way to plug in the BigQuery and big data. BigQuery is effectively the big data platform. Everybody, leave me with names. The only common names that is across cloud provider is Identity and Access Manager. The Identity and Access Manager, IAM. That's the only name that is consistent. Anything else is called in a different way.
Oh, right. Yeah. I think that's why I've always felt the whole concept of multi-cloud is challenging for a lot of people, right? I think because it's not just different names. As a security person, probably it's easier. Sorry?
It's different skills as well. It's different Terraformation. I mean, Terraformation is so behind. And for who doesn't know, Terraformation is effectively, the scripting language that lies behind, spinning up a number of resources. And for example, AWS has its own specific one that is not aligned with Terraformation. CloudFormation has effectively a number of services available before Terraformation catch up, because Terraformation is multi-cloud. So it needs to translate a number of things and it's still catching up, while CloudFormation is much more on the front foot.
Yeah, and I think to your point about, I guess, Terraform, and a lot of people are actually using Terraform as their universal, almost like a universal language across the organization, so that they can write once and use multiple cloud, but reality is far from it.
You have to write once, then translate for multiple cloud.
Yeah, probably that's the reality of it. So there's the reality, and then there is what the expectation is, I guess.
In a lot of my clients, so Terraformation, somebody's asking, is effectively a common language that you can write. So scripting effectively the resource that you want to spin up, how do you want to link them up, and so on. And it's not specific, so it's what is commonly called infrastructure as code. And
so Terraformation, do you mean Terraform? As in
Terraformation.
Yeah, right. Okay, sweet. That makes sense, because I was like, so I thought kind of like it stands out of its own. But to your point, Terraform is the language which you use to kind of start building up infrastructure as code for this thing. Okay, sweet. So in terms of Google Cloud and the conversation around Google Cloud, multi-cloud, I'm keen to start from the very basic in terms of, we spoke about blast radius, we spoke about, I guess, some of the basic things and how services are quite different. In terms of Google Cloud security, would you just use it for data, or is that the main purpose people use? Because I think it's worthwhile finding out what do people use it for. So from a security perspective, you can look at, okay, so those kind of projects are what you would see primarily in Google Cloud. So to your point earlier, would I only see data analytics projects on Google Cloud?
No, I actually saw a lot of projects going on GCP. Analytics is the prevalence one that I saw around, but one of my latest clients had a lot of computing there. So Kato machines and stuff like that. And Kato machine is effectively just machine that you can spin up, do a function, and kill it. And it's not the majority though. So I haven't seen a lot of organization going with GCP. So I think here GCP was competing with the police for the license to effectively to operate. And in the UK is a little bit particular, because anything government-wise, they need to have a completely different segmented element. So the three providers were challenging each other, were competing with each other to actually get on board first and get them on board. So some department got into Azure, some department went into AWS, and some other in GCP. And they're using effectively them GCP as a standard whenever they decided. So compute, data, and so on and so forth. But as you said, I really saw a lot of project in BigQueries and analytics. Very few times I saw compute in there.
Interesting. And I think there's a question from Sunil as well, which is a good one. If you're embarking on a journey on multi-cloud, what is a good recommendation for a service to use to run code if it isn't Terraform?
My suggestion is don't start a journey multi-cloud.
Oh, for people who haven't heard the first episode. I totally forgot that part.
I'm not a fan of multi-cloud, and it might be controversial because I'm Cloud Security Alliance, but the amount of time I saw any transformation fail on one cloud, you need to really, really be mature to have multi-cloud. And whenever you consider multi-cloud, my suggestion tend to be consider service by service. So a good example is you spin all your service in AWS, but you don't want to lock down in one system. So what you can do is you spin the data in another cloud provider. So you can spin them up with a basic number of, you can rebuild the machine in a basic way, but the data is already there, because the export of the data is the major consideration you have to do. Cloud provider are really cheap in pumping data in and really expensive in pumping data out, because they want to lock you in. And the ratio is almost 1 to 10. So the cost of pumping data in versus the pumping data out. Hence why I said,
Wow. Karthik is on to you, man.
on that, actually, it's true, because GCP, before being GCP, they were a Kubernetes shop. So a microservice, Kubernetes microservice, anybody call it in a different way. Let's call it microservice in general. And for that, I say yes. If you have a microservice environment where you have chassis on multiple cloud environment, then effectively you almost abstract the concept of cloud, and you have a cloud on your cloud, because effectively you have the microservice environment where you spin up service here and there. And then effectively you just use bare bone metal, regardless of where it is. It could be GCP, it could be Rackspace, it could be your server in your home, or your server in your data center. It doesn't really matter, because you have effectively created your own private cloud across cloud provider, as long as you maintain a good connectivity and a good encryption throughout. And in that way, you can orchestrate the microservice. And for orchestration is spinning up, spinning down, where they span up, and so on, regardless. So at that point, you can do really multi-cloud. And some organizations are doing, but is with a specific caveat that is really expensive, and you can't, and you don't use the potential of multi-cloud of cloud. I'll give you a good example. You use Kubernetes, you use microservice, okay?
Yeah.
AWS has a security console that monitors the service. Your service are almost completely invisible to them, because they're not natively hooked up to that. Azure, the same. Azure Security Center has a number of security measure. When you do container, what you tend to do is effectively firewall rules inside the containers, because left, east, and west is where you want to focus your attention on in firewalling, not north and south. And Azure is completely invisible what you're doing inside the containers. GCP is slightly different, because they're natively a Kubernetes shop. But if you use just compute with a chassis and your microservice on top, then it's still invisible for them. Now and that's kind of the trade-off we're using, the microservice environment across multi-cloud, and that's when you're really doing multi-cloud, but you can't use really the power of multi-cloud or the power of cloud, because the services are not natively hooked in.
Oh, I guess so where you're coming from, the school of thought that you're coming from is more that you need to have some kind of maturity, or probably have the caveat, or what service are going to maximize the value that you can bring to a customer through, I guess, microservices model, where you're focusing more on the microservices layer. At the bottom, shouldn't really matter whether it's Google Cloud or AWS or whatever, but it's more about, I guess, the microservice and what it needs to serve in terms of an API request coming in, I guess.
Right, but it really depends on what you want to do. So the majority of, we're talking about a scale. So if we look at a scale of maturity, you're looking at infrastructure as a service and lift and shift. So take your service and put it in the cloud. Really basic, really ugly, but it's the first approach to the cloud. And then you start using cloud native service, like, function as a service, or the log analysis, or the service queue, SNS and SQS for AWS, and so on and so forth. So you're going from pure bare bone metal rented to a more evolved cloud solution or cloud service, where you start using the native service. And then all the way to Nirvana, when you use eventually some service as a microservice. But in order to microservice unless you're using it from the very start, that's an evolution. that's the end of the journey when you use the cloud, an abstraction on top of the cloud.
Interesting.
Or you could use Lambda. You could use Lambda or Azure Function or I don't remember the GCP one. Anyway, code as function. That is effectively infrastructure as a code, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, and then function as a service is the Nirvana, is the least one, where you just run code somewhere.
Yep. And I think there are a couple more questions coming in. So would you say GKE is still a leader in terms of managed container orchestration service? Thanks for that question, Durpin.
I haven't poked around AKS too much. So
for people who don't know what AKS is.
Sorry. Yes.
Yeah. Why clarify?
Amazon. The Amazon version of GKE, so effectively the container service or the container offering of Amazon.
They call it EKS.
EKS?
Yes.
Jesus, it changed all the time.
I know, right? So it's so it came out from the ECS, which is the Enterprise Container Service. Now they have Enterprise. I think it's Enterprise Kubernetes Service. So anyway, yeah, GKE versus so you haven't played around much with EKS?
No. But GKE is a bit more. I played around a little bit more.
What are your thoughts on GKE? Is that from a security perspective? Orchestration, I guess, in this context.
The orchestration is good. It's effectively the abstraction layer. So you effectively delegate into somebody else to orchestrate and to run your own container service. So you have the image somewhere, you have your stuff somewhere, and you can apply some element more natively, like access control rule. So if you look at container service, like bare bone metal, you deploy a container somewhere, a container orchestration service somewhere, with the hardware to actually to run the container. You spin your containers, and then one. Thank you for elastic.
Thanks, man. I was like, even I'm losing my touch now. So like, even I'm losing my touch. There you go.
I was thinking,
so if for anyone who's listening, it's E for Elastic, not for E for Enterprise. So it's Elastic Kubernetes EKS. Let's just go with that service. There you go. Elastic Kubernetes Service. Took me a second for my coffee to kick in.
Why not? I like AKS because it was Amazon Container Service.
You should have named it, Francesco. You should have named it. But
I am complaining because, okay, I'll disclose it. I'm going to be one of the spokesperson for Amazon. So I'm joining Amazon.
Wait, is this exclusive?
Yes. It's a preview.
Wait, the pretty face is moving to Amazon. Oh.
Yes.
Wait, it's going to be all sanctioned now, man. It's going to be all, so we can only
I know.
We're having Google Cloud conversation.
I can speak freely up to this point. Then I'm going to wear my Amazon hat, unfortunately. But,
so for people who are listening in, please bash up more Google Cloud questions and Francesco before he changes the group to AWS. Not that it's a bad group to be at, because I think my area has primarily been AWS, so I don't disagree with your approach, but it's always good to have more people talk about GKE and Google Cloud in general. So coming back to the topic again, and I think, so GKE is great from an orchestration perspective, to your point. I think Karthik just came back also saying that it's definitely from an SME perspective, a multi-cloud is more of a Fortune 1000 or 2000, which I kind of agree with, and I'm keen to know your thoughts on this as well. A multi-cloud is more of an enterprise or multinational, like global companies. They probably have that problem because they obviously have different teams. It's not really a problem, but they have different teams which are large enough.
I'll say opportunity. Bigger organizations have more people skilled on multiple cloud providers, so have different opportunity.
Yeah, actually, that's true.
I'll spin it in positive. But also, if you consider it, anybody that starts natively on the cloud has also the same opportunity. So a lot of startups. So I was discussing, I think, with 10x in a financial forum, and who doesn't know, we have a flourish of fintech in the UK, and 10x is one virtual credit card. There is that one, 10x Revolt, and Monzo. I think they're the three major ones that drives the fintech, and they're cloud native from the get-go. And in that environment, they can do whatever they want because they don't have legacy. In a big organization, what you tend to find is smaller project on the cloud, but a lot of legacy, and a lot of organizations that drive for different things.
Oh, yeah. And I think to your point earlier, when we were talking about serverless or function as a service, a lot of people have, well, some of the product companies that I know, they have gone into serverless and still carry the old weight of legacy running on EC2 or compute instances as well. So it's almost like a mixed bag. And to your point about maturity earlier, from a Google Cloud space perspective, what does maturity at a beginner level look like in terms of if someone's starting off on Google Cloud today? What are the basic things that they could be doing in terms of, it could be upskilling, or it could be if you turn on, say, for example, in AWS, you can turn on CloudTrail, CloudWatch, you can things like that. Is there a similar, almost like a top 5 things to do in Google Cloud when you're starting today?
I think so. From my perspective, and with the CCSK, that is effectively the cloud knowledge, is with the Cloud Security Alliance, we're trying to take that approach at cloud independence. So what are the pillars that we recommend? And one of the pillars is actually step number 1, understand the division of responsibility. So what, depending on the service that you want to use, what you are responsible for in terms of data, security, and so on and so forth, and what the cloud provider is responsible for. And I give you a good example. If you decide, okay, I'm going to use compute, so I'm going to use effective infrastructure as a code, hence, I'm responsible for the full stack up to the physical layer, where the physical layer is dedicated from, is effectively handed over to the cloud provider. So I'm delegating the responsibility of the physical layer in terms of security and so on and so forth to the cloud provider. Anything else is my responsibility. So understand which kind of service do you want to use and to which level. Step number 2, limit the number of services. The least you have, the better you have. The better chance of securing them you have. And I've seen that over and over and over, where the organizations say, yeah, we go to the cloud, let's use everything. And your security team is 2 people and you stretch across 400 projects and you die. So instead, it's much better to say, as AWS as organization and so on and so forth, you say, well, we're going to spin up machine in this region, we're going to review service by service, and then we're going to give you patterns on how to use the service. And then effectively step number 4. In between step number 2 that I jumped in and 4, there is the foundation. So step number 3 for me is the foundation. And is decide effectively which service do you want to use. And for the fundamental one, what security requirement do you want to put? So that effectively you can start developing the patterns on how to use the service, depending on which service do you want to use. And a very simple example is, okay, we want to start using compute. What is the basic stuff? Networking, connectivity, and access control. There is some specific requirement for that. You can expose RDS or RDP function. You need to spin up things in 3 tiers with 3 different network and access control rules across different things. You want your environment as segmented as possible, because if one element get compromised, you limit your blast radius. You want to divide the accounts that can manage different things or different application as much as you can. So you don't want one single administrator that effectively manage everything, because then your blast radius reduction with the segmentation is completely pointless. Because you know what? Do I attack your servers, or do I attack the person who manage all the servers? I think I social engineered the person. And that's effectively step number 4. And we can go on, and I have
and I think to your point, I was hoping more in terms of if you could name a few services that they could be turning on. And to your point, from an architecture perspective, 100%. I guess the step you mentioned probably should be the first few things you think about. Are there any, I guess, specific services that you can call out that people should look at? At least basic?
Not as such. I mean, there isn't any. So if you take Azure, there is Azure Security Center that tells you a number of things.
Yeah.
GCP is not as mature, so it doesn't have native security service that is really there. You have specific things, but you need to know what you effectively enable it for. Things
Sorry,
like
that's my dog.
don't worry. I think in shelter in place, we are all stuck at home with pets and dogs and
Yes.
girlfriends and wife
Yeah,
and kids.
mine is like a puppy, so he's just been quite interested in getting involved in the podcast quite a bit. Now, I was thinking to your point about if every I guess each service in GCP, you need to know how to. So, how do you do auditing on Google Cloud? Like, I'm just going to take a very
Good question. Actually, I had exactly the answer in one of my podcasts because I had Andy, that is the head of compliance for GCP, in my podcast. So we did an hour just on compliance and continuous compliance. But to summarize the discussion that we have, and we had, so there is something called Forseti that is effectively a rule engine embedded in GCP, where effectively you can specify the conditions and specific rules that you want to match, yes or no, and you can display them. So you can you can specify the rules in a Forseti engine, and then export the data or the result effectively of this in big queries, and then display it with a query, with a dashboard, with whatever, to see, are my machine compliant or not? And a good example of that is, are my machine built on the latest image? Or have my machine been rebuilt in the last, 7 days, and things like that? So you can write effectively your specific rule.
Interesting. And to your point about the rule engine, what is a mature, because I guess one of the questions people ask always for doing security in cloud is the fact that you can scale. So as your microservices scale or as your infrastructure scales in cloud, you're able to scale your security, whether through automation and through, I guess, integrating security as it's developed. Mm-hmm. Is that a challenge in Google at the moment? And because I'm just going off Darpan's comment as well, Darpan basically mentioned that AWS did well with organization-based firewalls, and GCP released in beta. And Karthik's got a point on the FedRAMP approval as well as to why people go multi-cloud. So I'm thinking multi-cloud and very limited feature set in Google Cloud probably doesn't come across as a very security friendly or a security forthcoming. Like, I mean, because I'm just getting a bit nervous about this. You need to give me some comfort, man.
I can't disclose near deny. I can't agree near deny, and because we represent them all, and so I don't want to bash. I don't want to bash any cloud environment. What I can say is, GCP is the one that joined the race the last. So AWS and Azure are really the one that are challenging each other, and if you want, creating service by default, and security is a big part of both of them. So AWS had a lot of heat for the S3 bucket open by default. Azure had a lot of heat because effectively the rules for role-based access control, so effectively how you delegate service here and there, were not granular enough, where in AWS were extremely granular. GCP is still catching up. So you still have access control rules from an API to API service similar to AWS, where you effectively say this particular key can access this and this. That is fundamentally very, very similar. But you don't have a security service as such, like the Azure Security Center or the log monitoring. You don't have a lot of those components by default. They're incidental, they're configuration item that ideally is how it should be, but they're not called security as such.
Right. Okay, so I kind of have to figure out a way how Right. So if I'm starting today, is there some in Google Cloud, and I'm thinking for security architects or probably listening into this, and
you want the answer.
Yeah, no, I think
you're trying to put me to have one specific answer.
Well,
I'm never going to give you the satisfaction
to
say. I'm never going to give you the satisfaction to say that's what you're searching for.
That one just came back on for SETI. He said it's an open source as well, so opportunities exist to contribute directly as well, which is an interesting thing because a lot of services on AWS are open source, but you can't they have that AWS umbrella on it. But sounds like there is an opportunity there.
Google is a little bit different. Google is a little bit different because if you look at what they did with Kubernetes, if you look at what they did with the container service for SETI is a lot of open source stuff. So they encourage really the community to contribute.
Oh, right. So, and to your point, does that make thanks, Amanda. Great effort. Great effort on trying to answer this.
No, he's trying to force me to say something.
No,
he
I'm not
knows
trying
that
to
I
say.
know and I think, but I can't say in streaming.
We
Let's
probably should
put
talk
it
about
this
this
way.
offline. Like, I'll let everyone know what you said offline after this. I think it's really interesting, and I'm just conscious of the time as well for you, because it's really I find a lot of security people are still a bit unsure, and probably are for rightly so, but there is opportunity to improve in Google Cloud, and whether you want to go with it as it improves is probably a decision that people should consider. Would that be right in assuming that, okay, because you have a team which is working on Google Cloud at the moment, and there might be a lot of services that may be in beta or may not be as mature as AWS, so it probably should be giving it a bit more closer lens, or a bit more of, I guess, zoom into it a bit more? Would you say at least that's a good recommendation for security architects listening in?
For security architect is use the least amount of service that you can, because then you can interpret how to use it. And that's why I was stressing a lot on patterns. Develop the pattern on how to use the service and how to chain them up, like compute, storage, and networking, and access control, and so on. That can be a single pattern to specify this is how to use it. And then you can also develop Terraformation template on the back of it, saying this is the ideal way to configure, and then you fine tune it and tweak it.
Oh.
If you want to look at one service in GCP, that is what you're trying to push me to say, look at for SETI rules and continuous compliance. So how can you write some rules, run them against your environment, so one really easy set of rules that you can implement is CIS, so Center for Internet Security. They develop a number of controls and sets for GCP, Azure, AWS, but you can embed those rules inside for SETI engine. You can say, you know what, is my environment compliant for CIS? And CIS is a well-known standard, so it's from a compliance perspective, you go well along, and from a security compliance, you get it's all right.
Interesting. There's a good point, but I just saw the question from Darpan again, which is, do you consider Cloud Armor as one of the GCP's native security service?
Which one, sorry?
Cloud Armor. It's in the comments.
Cloud Armor.
Darpan, you may want to link us to it, I guess. Unless Cloud Armor is like a Windows... Oh, sorry. I don't remember what Cloud Armor is. Cloud Armor is a SaaS provider.
Good shout out. Across Cloud Armor.
It's a product that I came across. They do cloud security posture. If by the way, this was a great way for them to have a shout out on our show without. I'm like, you and I both were like, what is Cloud Armor? I haven't heard of this service in AWS or GCP. I'm like, oh, it's a vendor. So great shout out for vendor.
But if you want a very independent one, HashiCorp has released of recent a number of Terraformation template with the posture and patterns from a security perspective. Unfortunately, they operate in AWS, so you can have that number of patterns. And I think I know who developed a lot of them. And you had it in your show.
Yep.
And coming from Netflix.
Yes, I know. I didn't want to call it out because I'm pretty sure. But that's why I'm like, I'm just trying to be quiet. But you're making me say things now.
Man, I know the industry. I know everybody in this industry.
Oh, it is. Wait, Darpan just messaged. So is it actually something in Google Cloud?
I will definitely look at it. I didn't know about
sharing that link, Darpan. We kind of can think we were confusing it with something else, but I think I need to bring Darpan in, man. Darpan, you're gonna hear from me, man. It sounds like you're doing a lot of Google Cloud.
That's the challenging thing, that a lot of things are coming up. I'm struggling, so that's why I do a lot of podcasting, because I can, know from the cloud provider itself, what is the latest thing you release? And a lot of them, they don't know because it's so quick.
Oh, and I think there's a comment from Justin as well about Microsoft is the #1 contributor to open source in the world. So plenty of opportunity to contribute to Azure tooling and services.
Well, they kind of bought GitHub, and now they're developing GitLab on the back of GitHub. So they took a definitely a definitely strong approach on open source, and this since Palmer left. Let's say they changed completely perspective on open source and all that stuff. So yes, it's true. And they're doing a lot of stuff around open source and opening up. They're still closed source, a lot of the stuff that they're doing, but they're opening up.